Were you feeling like you were on a path and had this trajectory, and then all of a sudden maybe you felt guided to go a different way?
Waking up one day and just saying, oh, this is the epiphany.
When you connect to the matrix field in this waveform expression of yourself,
What was that like? Did you ask his name, her name? What was that encounter like? Talk about the future of our planet and the changes that we're going to go through. What's your reaction then? What types of things have you learned? Find out more about the incredible, eye-opening, jaw-dropping things he discovered on his top secret mission. Ever wonder what would happen if you woke up with a superpower? Or what about if a perfect stranger on the street came up to you and called you by a different name?
I'm incorporating crystals into my life by incorporating meditation.
Welcome to Guided, where I take a closer look into the journey only brave souls dare to take, guided by an unseen benevolent force, perhaps rift with challenges, as in the hero's journey, yet if taken, leads to a life you've always imagined, a life calling to you. Welcome to Guided, helping you navigate your divine journey. I'm your host, Jodi Reynosa. And if you are new to my channel, Jodi's Gems, subscribe and hit the bell on the right, because you will be then allowed to see the latest and greatest of the life-changing interviews that I have here on the show. And welcome, Sky. Welcome back to my show.
Jodi, it's great to be on the show again. I love it.
Yeah, last year we talked about a lot of amazing things. And this year, I'm so excited to have you back, because we are going to talk about the fact that you have an upcoming exciting event with Neil Donald Walsh, who is the author of Conversations with God.
Yeah.
So
incredible.
That's the loved book by everybody.
Yeah. Influenced me a lot. When I was in my 20s, I read that book, and it transformed my inner dialogue from being very kind of discipline oriented and harsh with myself to the compassion that he brings to his writing, the self-compassion, and realizing that there's when we're tender with ourselves and gentle with ourselves, we can still be very aggressive and assertive and create great things. But there's a balance of those forces that he brought to my awareness.
Yeah. Is there one in particular that you can remember?
A moment like that?
Or even from his book, kind of like even the love letters from God. I think there was a sequel.
Yeah, he wrote a whole series, and his newest book is called The God Solution. So
I've heard about that. Yeah.
Next Thursday, and it'll be recorded online. We're going to have a conversation hosted by two folks that I love, Lena Vasquez and Peter Lucas, who have this group called A Life on Purpose.
Oh, I love it.
And they're bringing us together for the scientist, myself, and Neil, the mystic, the spiritual messenger, to talk about his view of God. The God solution is pure love, the experience of pure love, not a deity out there, that we can sort of make larger than life, but the experience we have of pure love. And then my version of spirituality is looking at the synchronicities that happen in our lives as the connection to the divine.
I love it. In fact, let me just make sure that we bring up your two books. So we talked about on the show before last year, Living in Flow and Leap to Wholeness, how the world is programmed to help us grow, heal, and adapt. And I love that the foreword is by one of my previous guests on Guided. His name is Jeff Thompson. Yeah. And Jeff wrote The Divine CEO. And the one of the reasons I love that Jeff wrote it is he also went through his own transformation in life, went through a really, really difficult life, and transformed through so many various experiences, including some of the spiritual writings from just the wise traditions of old, ancient traditions. And then the fact that the Divine CEO touched you and you were prompted to reach out to Jeff to write the foreword of that book, Leap to Wholeness. I think that was beautiful.
And it was his interview with you where he talked about his own awakening experiences. And he shared his awakening experiences in a really vulnerable way, which is something that I think Neil would speak to as well. Yeah. He talked about, when he had moments of real clarity in his life, it was not a like euphoric experience. It was a devastating experience of realizing all the people he'd impacted and feeling absolutely compelled to go back to those people and make reparations with them. Right. And that really spoke to me as, the awakening process. The euphoria comes from the release of our ego onto who we think we are and repairing the damage that we've done. And when I've had moments where I've seen my behavior and how it's impacted people, and it is a relief to see it, really understand it and then be able to change it.
Yeah. It's almost that omniscient view of yourself from that observer perspective and how you've impacted so many people. Yeah. Good, bad, ugly. And then, like you said, going back how Jeff did and making those repairs if needed.
And you can't see the good unless you see the ugly first,
Right, right. And then at the same time, forgiving yourself along the way.
Absolutely.
So I love that. So as far as this upcoming event with Neil Donald Walsh, what exactly are you going to be collaborating along with? So you said the synchronicity part with what you bring to the table and how you view spirituality and, the physicist that you are, and then his kind of, take on God with love and all of that.
So I think that we can talk about the divine influence in our lives through the experiences that we have and the power that we have to create reality. I don't even think of it as creating reality. I think of it as influencing our circumstances, moving through what I think of as a tree of multiverse possibilities, these parallel realities that branch off. And this is a common view in physics, but it's not usually taken to a level of actually application. And I think that, part of the work I do is arguing, I think effectively, that the way we think about quantum mechanics as reductionist, as, based upon little particles that I'll add together and you can break everything into parts, I think that's a flawed argument. And so I think that the quantum principles of indeterminism and superposition of different exclusive possibilities, I think those principles apply as a whole to systems. And that's what I show in my work. And I went some distance to show in a paper that was published recently in the journal Quantum Reports.
Yes, which is so exciting. So that paper is called Space-Time Paths as a Whole. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it's essentially a reformulation of some of the basic principles of quantum wave functions, namely the path integral and the Schrodinger's equation, finding what are these equations trying to show us about the nature of reality, the underlying nature. And what I see, what I show is that we have to think about space-time as a whole.
Okay.
Usually what physicists do when they think about, in particular, time is tricky, right? Because time is something we're all so familiar with. And all we ever experience is the present moment. So we do what's called slicing. We slice time into, sort of sheets, and every sheet is like a frame on a film strip. So then life is like this series of frames. But what I show is that we have to think about time as holistic, existing as an entire film strip as a whole. You can't cut it up into frames. And this is important because it leads to, as soon as you have time extending over a line and not just a single frame, you have a story involved.
You can also see the transformation.
You see a transformation, right?
Exactly. If you just see it spliced in little clips, you're not seeing the transformation over time.
Right. And so this is where the idea of synchronicity can actually take hold, because a synchronicity is a unexpected situation in the present, which might not even make sense to you, but it leads to something meaningful in the future. So there's this connection from present to future. And, we see this in movies all the time, right? Movies have plots. You know that when something weird happens, it's going to resolve. So we automatically do this in our filmmaking. And that's because the movie has a definite trajectory. So what I'm showing is that life also has this kind of trajectory. It's a branching trajectory. So it's like mixing the film world with the choose your own adventure books.
Right, right.
But it's the same kind of idea. And it leads to this sense that our actions, how do we choose actions which lead to the better branches of that tree, the ones that we really want to experience? Not that they're better or worse, but they're more aligned with what we consciously want in our lives.
It's so interesting because my husband had a dream, and he said it was about this tree, and we had these 3 different kind of options, right? And it was in his dream, we chose an option, but it reminded me of what we talked about in our last interview, about these different realities and these different synchronicities that can come, and basically that choose your own adventure, And
how did you choose in the dream?
Well, he said he chose this one branch, and we chose it together. And so we'll see what happens, right?
Right.
Well, we're on that adventure together, and it's been so transformative.
That's
so,
wonderful.
I mean, I think that sometimes when life gets hard, it's like, oh, really? Did I choose the right path?
This?
Right. Or did I choose it? Of course we chose it. Right.
Well,
and it's so transformative.
And we're part of a collective environment. So we're not choosing and creating everything individually.
Right.
But in any difficult situation, we have, I think of it as, the way we I think the universe is trying to fool us. I think it's constantly showing us situations which challenge our self-worth, challenge our understanding of the world, make us doubt ourselves. And especially when we have assumptions or biases, it's kind of like a search engine. It'll send us more of confirmation of those things. It's like a mystical confirmation bias. So synchronicities happen in our lives to reinforce what we already believe. And the way out of that trap, it's basically known as Maya in Indian philosophy. The way out of that trap, in my suggestion, is by being aware of what our heart is choosing. So our heart is always choosing either to open or to close. Opening means somebody comes to you and they tell you something you don't like to hear. And closing is to like shut down your mind around your already existing views and then sort of argue back your point. Opening is to recognize that you feel uncomfortable, sort of deal with that internal feeling, and then come back to the person with an open-minded question or curiosity.
Yes, I love that. Approaching things with a curiosity. And it's like from that fixed mindset to that growth mindset.
Yeah.
And challenging those beliefs too. Because first of all, what lens am I approaching this from? What experience or what wound, am I approaching this from? And how better can I open?
What wound, yeah. So I'll give an example of this. It really happened to me recently that I think really illustrates the power of why it's so important for us to understand synchronicity in our lives. It's not just this positive thing that we manifest, what we want to manifest. It's a powerful reflection on our lives. So I'm doing a social media campaign, and I have the great blessing to work with a new campaign manager.
Nice.
And they're doing this great work on my Instagram. You can go to my Instagram, Sky Nelson-Issacs, and check out what we're posting there for my book.
Awesome.
And it's wonderful. I'm so blessed. And we're creating a new video. They wrote to me and said, can you create a 1-minute video for us to use for this thing? And I said, sure. And I knew they needed it right away. But while I had them on the phone, I wanted to talk about sort of nitpicking this other thing that they'd written, and sort of making sure the text for the advertisement was correct and was good. And I was sort of micromanaging. But why was I micromanaging? I mean, you can guess, right? I was afraid.
Right. Fear.
Fear, and
fear is associated with so much control.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I wanted to control the situation because I was anxious about it coming out a certain way.
Yep.
And so that's the first problem, right? I'm coming at the situation with a sense of anxiety. And what I tried to do then is I spent an hour with her talking about the wording on this other thing, when what she needed from me, she had already told me, was this video clip. And so instead of being supported by the universe, by giving the universe what it requested of me, the video clip, I came back with this sort of control aspect to try and do things differently. But then I got the video clip to her like an hour later, but they're 3 hours later than me. So by the time they got it, they were off for the day, which meant it rolled over to the next day, which meant we were a day behind on like a 10-day campaign. Oh my God, what did I create this reality? Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And then so over that night, this is another important part. Over the nighttime, I was increasingly anxious because now I realized what I had done and I wanted to fix that, right? So I almost sent an email sort of trying to fix all of that. And I caught myself because I saw my filters playing out, my sort of making the worst possible scenario in my mind. And I just stopped and I dealt with my inner state. I meditated, I wrote in my journal and I did my tools. And if I had written a note, it probably would have regretted that and made things worse. And this is how synchronicity sort of, it gets worse and worse and worse before it gets better until we stop interfering based upon our anxious states. So the next day, turns out, I was anxious also because I noticed that there were no signups on the course that we were doing. So the next day, I've managed all these emotions. I'm talking to her, trying to be really gracious and like not get into it. And she says, well, we found out that there was a problem with the reporting. So there actually are signups in the course. I spent an hour talking to Facebook directly. And she says this to me. I'm like, wow, thank you so much. Right. That's amazing. And we got the video. Here's a sample of it. I looked at the video and I was like, I don't like the ending. Can we splice a different ending? But I caught myself and I knew that was going to be adding to the problem rather than just accepting where we were and the gratitude for what had been created for me. So synchronicities are these moments that show up to either help us, like, here, can you make a video for me and I'll publish it everywhere, or get in the way where I get my ego in the process and I say, can you change it in this way? And it takes another extra day and all that.
Yep. That's a beautiful example.
We create our own problems, but the universe is sort of just reflecting back to us.
It's so true. It's so if we can stop and pause and say, what is reflecting back to me? What do I need to look at? How do I need to get out of my own way? And again, am I approaching this from a wound? Am I approaching this from fear? Am I approaching this from something that happened in my past that is creeping into the present for some reason? And like you said, the control aspect. This also brings me to a movie that my husband and I watched last night. The new Dune movie's out. Okay.
Oh, I'm so excited.
It's amazing. Yeah. Okay.
So
but there's this one scene that really speaks to what you're talking about. And, one of their, I don't want to give too much away, but one of their ships is like in this sandstorm and it is just very chaotic and they cannot see. And he just like lets everything go, closes his eyes. And it's just like, because he remembers this one mantra from a guide saying like, you basically just have to let yourself be in the flow, and you have to surrender. Essentially, that's what it is. You have to surrender and stop taking control, like to your point,
Oh, that's beautiful.
Because you're going to get in your own way. And so I was just like stressing on the edge of my seat, like, oh my gosh, they're going to crash and all this stuff's going to happen. But it was like a really awesome example to me. Like, wow, if I can just get out of my own way, if I can allow myself to be in the flow, and like your book talks about too, allowing the synchronicities, be in the flow of life, be in the flow of the universe, all of that. So many amazing, beautiful things can happen. And we're like surprised by it too. We can be very surprised by so many beautiful things that happen.
Well,
go ahead.
My new book, Leap to Wholeness, takes the concept of flow and synchronicity to another direction, a new level, because I talk about time and I explain my research in time, and time is holistic, and that leads to the possibility that synchronicities connect meaningful actions in the present with outcomes in the future. But the key idea connecting that to flow is that the opportunities that come our way are synchronicities, the unexpected opportunities, and when we accept those opportunities, saying yes to an opportunity that someone gives us at work, we might have a filter that might want to stop us. Like, I got to be perfect. I'm not good at that yet. I got to wait until I'm better at it. So then we say no, and we miss the opportunity. We get out of flow. But if we say yes, and we get our filter out of the way, I don't have to be perfect here. I'm just going to go for it. then we take the opportunity and we get into flow. So the synchronicities are the opportunities that come our way. The flow is what happens when we say yes to those opportunities. And the filters are the gatekeepers.
Ooh, I like that.
They're the things that tell us, yes, you can have that, or no, you can't, based upon what we believe about ourselves.
Uh-huh. That reminds me of, I have this mantra, and I heard it from somebody else, and I just kind of adopted it because I loved it so much. Our actual pain from wounding, if we sit with it and we go into the flow of it to transform, the pain can be our portals of power.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. If we can just be in the flow of saying yes, like you said, then we can actually transform. And just being in that flow of saying yes, we are actually growing. You know, maybe we thought, oh, because we're perfectionists or whatever, or we have to do it perfect before we say yes, you know, we're not allowing that growth to take place. And also what I've found is when we say yes to something that we don't think we're good at yet, along that path, we meet people that we're supposed to meet, that help boost us and launch us and act as catalysts even more so. And then it launches us even higher. We up level because of that experience. So like you said, saying yes is just transformative.
And part of that is choosing to put ourselves in challenging situations where we are doing things we don't know how to do. And trusting that synchronicity will, just as you said, will happen to provide us the opportunities to grow and the knowledge we need along the way.
Yep, absolutely. I was looking at your paper again, and there was this one part that talked about how traditionally, you know, quantum physicists look at time and space, but there's also this arrow concept. And we kind of talked a bit about it at the beginning though, but like if you're following that arrow, you can see the transformation that happens. And I feel like as you're challenging that theory, you're challenging the fact that we are actually transformed through time, you know? So I like the fact that you're challenging that. You're challenging tradition. You're like a disruptor in a good way. So this is fantastic.
You know, I think it's funny to say that one of the biggest things we can do to make the world a better place right now is upgrade our concept of space and time. Because it seems really abstract, right? But you know, most of us think of space as how we divide up essentially our property. We separate ourselves from each other. We feel isolated from each other with our space between us. And our house is separate from the neighbor's house. And we think of time as how we have billable hours. You know, we get paid for our time, or we have free time. And so both of these are very reductionist. You know, we break everything up into pieces. And also exploitative. Like we wonder why we are all feel separate and feel taken advantage of. Well, we have a worldview that is based upon space and time being that way. So this notion of time and space being holistic, which is already known from particle physics, where the end point of a travel determines what happens along the way. The path before that is dependent on the end point. So there's this holism. We have to look at the whole life cycle of something.
Absolutely. Which also in turn says the journey is what really matters.
Absolutely.
Not all the stops in between.
Right. It's going to an endpoint that is in some sense defined already. Now there's a choose your own adventure aspect where there's lots of different possible outcomes, but each of those has a pull to it. And essentially, I think that it's our inner anticipation, our inner, this is why I say it's important to be aware of where your heart is focusing. Because where your heart is focusing is that's the outcome that you're attaching to on that tree.
Right. And let me kind of rephrase what I was saying. The stops along the way matter, but it's the destination that we get caught up in too often. Where like there's this destination point and I have to get here and I have to accomplish these goals or whatever. But it's the transformation along the way and the joy in the journey that's important, you know? And so oftentimes we don't even take joy in the journey. We're just like, oh, get this over with so we can get to that one destination that we want to, you know?
Because we don't trust.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where I think synchronicity can help, because if we understand that synchronicity is a phenomenon in the world, we start to trust that it's going to happen. It's not all up to us manipulating space and time, but that there is a story that we're part of and a narrative that there's an orchestra that we're playing in.
Yes.
then we start to play our part and enjoy that without the worry about, am I going to get enough out of this in the end?
Yeah. And I also like the fact that you talked about, it's not just our part, but we help to be a participant in that orchestra.
Right.
As we play our part, we might be so concentrated on our part, but after we see the joy in the collective, we start saying, oh, I like how my harmony is going, with these other parts, and as a collective, it's sounding really beautiful because we can see what we do and how impactful we are together. So,
right. And those filters that, the filters keep us from expressing ourselves fully. But what we're talking about here is being able to pull away those filters. And this is a lot of what I teach in my workshops, is how to identify the thoughts in your mind that are coming up, which are habitual, that are from, as you said, the wounds in the past, the various conditioning that we have, the belief structures, the political part of the world we live in, all these things contribute as a framework of thinking that also has feelings behind it. So I think that I have to be perfect, but that's because I feel like if I'm not, I'll be shamed or embarrassed.
Right.
And so this really emphasizes, well, I have to then, it's a very strong compulsion to be this way, to be perfect. It's not just a thought, it's also a feeling.
Yeah.
And then in our bodies, we're carrying that trauma in our belly or in our limbs or wherever it is. And so it's working through all three of these aspects, our mind, our heart, and our body, and identifying what the filter is. And once you name the filter, it gets a little easier to start to see it in your life. And then, as I said, you start looking for opportunities to challenge it.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a couple things I wanted to say about the body. So number one, I believe that there's in our DNA so much knowledge, but it's not just what we bring, it's from our familial lineages. So oftentimes if we feel like we're in a funk or something, often I tell our clients, is this you? Or do you think it's also from another energy? Do you think it could be familial wounding that you're also feeling or remembering that's in your DNA, locked in your DNA? So there's a lot of questions that we might want to ask ourselves that can be empowering, because that can take us to the next level. Also, feeling it in our body. Where are we feeling it? Are you feeling it in your gut? Are you feeling it in your heart? Are you feeling it in your head? Where are you feeling it? And oftentimes, my husband and I, we talk about emotions. We talk about expressing emotions.
Right.
And sometimes there are, whether you're a man or a woman, and depending on the literacy that you've grown up with in trying to express emotions, sometimes you may lack that. So trying to be literate in, how to express that is it all depends. So if you can say, hey, this is the color of my emotion, or this is where I'm feeling it in my body, that may help. And so maybe those around you can be like, oh, I get it. Okay.
Identify with it.
Yeah. Oh, you're feeling a tightening in your chest. Okay. I get it. That makes sense.
There's a great analogy, the hologram, which is a great analogy for this both what you're talking about and the broader sense of filters and perspectives. And so the hologram is a piece of film, kind of like a photograph, but it's three-dimensional. So you look in it and you see a three-dimensional object floating there, like a face, let's say. And the way we create a hologram is different from a photograph. With a photograph, you always have a lens, and the light shines through the lens onto the film. The lens does is it converts it from what's known as the frequency domain into the spatial domain, so you can actually make sense of it. But what it does is it chooses a perspective. Like the lens is the perspective from which you see the object or the scene. With a hologram, you get rid of that. And so now you're looking at a hologram that's captured the complete information about your scene, the whole thing. This is why it's holistic. And then when I look from one angle, I'm going to see one perspective on the face. But if you look from a different angle, you're going to see a different perspective on that face, because it's three-dimensional, right? Just like when we move around each other, we see different angles. And so we're looking at the same physical object. It's a piece of film, but we're seeing different things. And the world is like this. The world, this is why the idea that the world is a holographic synchronicity machine in a way is so important. And I've shown in my paper that the equations of quantum wave propagation are essentially the same as holograms. So there's this real connection there. And in a hologram, when you look at this, you can look at the same thing and disagree on what you see. It's like the reality is different based on your perspective.
Right.
So then you look at why we disagree on so many things in the polarized common discourse. We read the same news article and we interpret it different ways based upon our conditioning, based upon our worldview. And then we think that we're reading the same thing, but we actually are in very different mental spaces from what we take in.
Oh yeah, even remembering a family vacation or a
Right.
memory from, like, say, a
Right.
holiday, you know, in the
Right.
same family, you all had the exact same experience, you think, and then you recall it together and you're like, wait a second, no, I don't remember that happening. You know, so we all have such a different perspective on that. Yeah, that's a great example.
And these are our filters. You know, this is
Right.
what one angle on the hologram is one filter, another angle on the hologram is a different filter.
Yeah.
And once we see that we have a perspective, then we can understand that there are other perspectives. And when we have an emotion tied to our perspective, it can be very difficult to realize this is not the complete story. This is just a partial story.
Or this is my interpretation of what happened. And you start wrapping that. Yeah, absolutely. So fascinating. I love your work and I love your perspective on things. Lately, say the last year since we talked last, tell me about some of the synchronicities that have taught you something and taught you to go higher in your progression and even transform more.
Well, there's, for me, synchronicity is really the flow of life experiences. And I see this connection between the outer and the inner in a global way. So like one of the reasons I think this conversation around polarization is so important is, like, I'll take the example of, the big public crisis, health crisis we've gone through for the past 2 years. And there are, people with various concerns about on different sides of the spectrum of, who's causing this and where's it coming from and what's the meaning of it. And my big question when studying synchronicity is, what's the lesson we're supposed to take from this situation? I'm always asking myself that question.
Yes. And
I think a lot of the time, because of our filters, we take the wrong lesson. We think that we get defensive, we get righteous, our heart chooses to focus on the negative or not negative, but the resentment or the anger or the fear, versus having the strength to say, that's true, but I also want to focus on gratitude, for instance.
Yes.
And so I think synchronicity can help us with this, because in 2019, I was on a book tour with my daughter. She was coming along we were in Canada, and we go into a bookstore to just see if there's a book we can read together. And we find this book on the shelf that I just pick up, and it looks good. It's called The Dog Who Saved the World. And it's about a health crisis, like globally, where this dog happens to have the genes to survive. And it also involves a time machine. So it's like nice for my work as studying time, and they go forward in time and they get the inoculation needed to save the world, basically, from this dog. And it just got me thinking for the first time about that kind of situation, which I had never thought about before. So that was one example of the meme about the public health crisis coming up before it ever happened, and giving me the sense that synchronicity is actually more involved than any one individual or it's not a human-made situation, but a global, universal situation that's arising to show us something important about our lives. And I think of synchronicity as there to help us learn and grow and heal. So then what is this situation helping us to heal? And I'll give one more synchronicity. Which is just, these are global, sort of non-causal situations, but they got me thinking about this. In Valentine's Day, just before, this is 2020, and my wife and I went to the movies, and we saw this movie. We hadn't known what it was. It was called Parasite. And we didn't know what it was going into it. It was just the only movie playing in the theater. It turns out to be a very dark movie, and I didn't really like it very much.
Yeah.
And but then a couple of weeks later, it won all the Oscars, and that was a trigger for me. Like, why is this movie winning all these Oscars? What's going on in our culture that's making this an important movie? And it was just a few weeks later that the pandemic struck, and we had to deal with the lockdown. And so, for me, there's this much broader picture about a spiritual journey that we're all on, which is unfolding. Yep. And so I pull away from any fear that's about this is the end of the world, and I focus on what are we trying to learn from the situation? Because I see ultimately synchronicity is a kind force here to help us grow and heal. And often it looks scary in the moment, but that's because that's what we need to do to uncover those wounds and move through them.
Yeah, little reminders. I think we talked about this in the last interview, but I definitely, and you've talked about this before, it just mirrors what our inner landscape is like individually. So it's just, you take that on a collective level, and in the world, on the external, you see what's happening to our inner landscape too, and those wounds that we need to heal.
Right.
So I feel like, when people say, well, what can I do? How can I help all these catastrophes and these big things going on that might be negative? Well, just do your inner work. One person at a time can really make an impact. It's just like that ripple effect, that pebble in a pond.
Right.
So
well, this is why wholeness is such an important concept for me. First of all, the world is holistic, so we are connected in ways that we don't understand. And when we become integrated as whole people with, like in the example that I gave of the working with my videographer person and sort of micromanaging, that was not my whole self. That was my anxious, scared self who was trying to make sure everything turned out properly.
Yeah, that wounded part.
So when I back away from that and see that in progress, that process, and peel it back, then I have a different self that shows up. And from that different self, all sorts of different choices happen, which lead to a gradual up-leveling of our lives. And so that's the leap to wholeness, is that you don't have to, there's no promise, you don't have to become a better person. It's about peeling away. It's about removing layers rather than adding things.
Right.
I give this example of a rainbow. A rainbow is white light that's been split apart. So the reason it's beautiful is because you've removed certain colors. You see red because you've taken away the blue. In the same way, we become beautiful when we remove the things that make us not beautiful, the fear and the judgment.
I like that. Wow. I also think that even the dark parts of ourselves, or what we see as dark parts, the fear, the anxiety, the wounding, all of that, they're messages of how we can shine brighter, though, as we integrate them. Because like you said, the wholeness, as we integrate them. Because I think if people just think, I'm just going to concentrate on my light side, and they bypass other parts of themselves, they're not going to get a holistic part of everything about all sides of themselves. And they're not going to really see certain things that even happen to them, or certain messages. Yeah.
And when we identify filters, what I try and do with people is, if my filter is, I need to be perfect to be successful, like I try to find a really pithy name, like a short statement of it, so that when I feel it in my body happening, I can say, oh, I need to be perfect to be successful.
Right. Yeah.
But then we modify it just with some language change, like I need to be perfect in order to control my life more. Or I'm trying to think of a good way to modify it. You find a simple change, but you don't try and deny it, because it's the reality. I feel like I have to be perfect.
Right.
So how do I shift that to be more, a little more specific about the ways that I feel like I have to be perfect, but allow me some freedom to not be perfect all the time. Like maybe I have to be perfect at work. Maybe that's true for me. But I don't have to be perfect at home with my family. I don't have to be perfect with my own hobbies and my own life, with myself, my discipline. So just allowing more spaciousness from those filters without denying them and saying they're just not true. I don't think that works.
Right. And I also think if we get rid of and I brought this up before, the destination of, like, even leap to wholeness, like that's a destination. If we think of it as a destination, like, okay, if I get through all these layers and I get to this wholeness, then life's going to be so great, And I feel like I've even had that notion somehow stuck in my mind, like embedded in my mind. If I can just get through that and that and that, I'm going to get to this wholeness,
Yeah.
But what I've realized is, as I transform as a person and I sift through these layers and this wounding, I may get to transform to this certain level, but then I might be reminded, maybe in a certain wounding or a certain experience back family of origin, but it might allow me to go deeper into that layer than I did before, but going deeper and maybe taking that back step, it then allows me to launch forward even more. So it's almost like you're doing this like 2 steps forward, 1 step back to just get further. It's almost like this resilience rubber band is what I feel, this like resilience transformation type a movement. That's what I felt like spiritually in my transformation.
I agree.
So it's like when I feel like there's this notion of like, oh, I just have to get through all these layers so I can get to that wholeness. No, that's not how it works.
Right. That's automatically assuming that you're not whole in the moment and trying to think something out there.
I love that. Yes. Absolutely.
So, and I thought of a synchronicity that happened just a couple months ago that was a good one. So my wife and I and my daughter went on a trip to Oregon to go to a wedding for a friend. And so 2 synchronicities. One, we get a ticket on the way up there. So we're driving on the freeway and we get pulled over and it's, it's not fun. So we're kind of in this funky mood. And then we pull over to find a place to use the bathroom. And we happen to pull on this road that's just a country road. So there's like no place to pull over. We can't figure it out. And finally, we're just like, just pull over at the very next turnout that you can find. We pull over and there's this huge blackberry bush filled with just tons and tons of blackberries.
Yum.
So we have this totally memorable moment, unexpected in the middle of this Oregon coast, picking blackberries for we had containers in the car. We just makeshift containers and picked blackberries for pie that we made when we got to our destination.
That's my favorite kind of pie.
So then the second synchronicity was getting to the wedding. And there's this guy at the wedding that seemed nice, but you meet people at weddings, right? You meet new people. And I sort of thought about saying hi to him, but we never had a chance to cross paths. The very end of the night, we're all dancing and we start talking. And it turns out he does work on researching gratitude, which is super cool because I study different consciousness and synchronicity. And and I said, I wrote a book on flow called Living in Flow and Synchronicity. And he said, well, it's funny because I met a physicist that I got his book called the same title or something like that. And but he had short hair. and I said, well, wait a minute.
That might be me.
Where was that? And it was at Claremont College down in Southern California. When I went down there to meet Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi at a conference. And I got to meet Csikszentmihalyi and get his signature and my book of his and give him a copy of my book that he had endorsed and just close that loop, which was really lovely. And at the same conference, I met this guy. We had talked and spent some time together and he bought my book. It's the same guy.
Oh my gosh. I love that.
We reconnected.
So he just didn't recognize you with the longer
my friend's
hair.
wedding. Right. And I didn't recognize him. Maybe that's why I was attracted to, in the moment to say, I got to meet this guy.
Something resonates. There's this energy that's so great.
And just along that note, just in the past week, Dr. Csikszentmihalyi passed away.
Oh,
so
his
just a well-lived life, beautiful contributions to the field of flow and positive psychology, and very grateful for that.
Oh, that's so neat that you had that interface with him too.
I know, just really treasure that.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's so neat. Oh, those are fun.
Yeah.
Those are fun examples. I like that. Well, you've had just a year, just chock full of just amazing, beautiful gems. That's so cool.
It's like another example, when my book came out in January, or it came out in March, but in the process leading up, I was like, how am I going to promote this book?
Yeah.
Because we're not doing anything in person. And that was a big part of what I did.
That's
the first
right.
book.
Yeah.
And, I was a little anxious about it. But I was listening, as the first step in my process is to listen to life, and somebody mentioned this thing called Clubhouse, which is a social media app. And I said, I don't know what that is.
Yes, that's right.
And then I started getting involved with Clubhouse and learning about what it was, and then realized this is like the perfect platform for me to give lectures. Right?
I forgot about that. I need to write that down, Sky.
Because I'm a former school teacher, so I'm very used to the lecture format, and I get a little insecure on film anyway. So it's like really to just be present with the voice.
Yeah,
is just it just turned out to be this definitely guided moment into that platform, and so now I've got a whole community there where I give regular conversations that I lead on anything from synchronicity and wholeness and flow to privilege and understanding, what's the last word? Universal basic income, like understanding certain political issues and the bigger picture of how wholeness in our society manifests itself or could manifest itself.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So how do we find you on Clubhouse? I'm not sure exactly how that works. Is there like does everybody have a handle or like
Yeah, it's my Twitter handle, which is
Twitter handle.
Nelson_Sky. But if you just look up Sky Nelson-Issacs,
okay,
you'll find me.
Okay,
and,
awesome.
And I'm on Instagram too, quite a bit, posting there, and Facebook.
Okay. Fun.
And people can find the webinar with Neil Donald Walsh this coming Thursday, October 28th.
Yep.
They can find it at physicsofwholeness.com.
physicsofwholeness.com. And I wanted to let everybody know that a lot of things are also posted on Sky's Synchronicity Institute.com.
Yeah, that's the same website.
Okay.
Just a direct link. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing things on that. So I'm going to have all of these in the description. So all of these links, and I've already posted the event on my Facebook and social media platforms. So.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel so blessed to be surrounded by just these wonderful thought leaders like yourself, and so grateful that we've reconnected.
I know. It's been such a pleasure. Anything else that you'd like to add before we close, or any advice that you'd like to give to people?
Well, the idea of wholeness is really practical because we're given many opportunities every day to either close down around our preconceived assumptions and sort of ossify. We get older, we tend to ossify and solidify around our views.
Yes.
Or we have the choice to open. And when we open, it's less secure and it's uncertain. But there's a whole principle around that in physics, right? The uncertainty principle. So let's align ourselves with the universe and be willing to be uncertain for the sake of coming together and bringing all these different parts together into a bigger whole.
I love that. Okay, so let me just quickly challenge that, because for those of us out there who are like, sure, that sounds great, Sky, the uncertainty principle, right? Because when we get into that little area that might still be wounded in us, and we're like, yeah, we want to get over that hurdle, that threshold, and we want to go into that uncertainty and we want to grow in that area, but we're like, we're so freaked out by that wounding, right? It gets in the way. What's your advice for that?
Well, there's a process I use that I describe in my book called the ARG process, right? Because when you're frustrated, you're like, ARG, I can't believe this is happening again.
Yeah.
So
real.
ARGH.
The
first is to accept the situation that you're in.
Okay.
We're not bypassing it and pretending that it's all hunky dory.
Right.
Accept that this is where you're at right now. This is your level of the journey. And then recognize the pattern. My book is really all about patterns, understanding the patterns in the cosmos, because patterns are holistic. They apply broadly, not just in one particular place, but across a whole region.
Right.
Patterns in our life apply over and over again in our life, things that happen to us again and again, whether it's, relationships that fail or jobs that don't turn out the way we want. So recognize the pattern, whatever it might be. I've been in this situation before. I got to recognize that and admit it to myself. And then value growth. That's the G part. So it's always coming back to, how am I going to grow versus how am I going to fix the situation?
Ooh, I like that. Totally different.
Yeah.
How am I going to grow versus fix it?
Because when you fix it, you're not actually grieving any of the loss. You're not actually dealing with the negative emotions that you're feeling. You're just trying to remove them.
Yeah.
So don't try and fix, accept the problem, and grieve the lost opportunity, and value growth, because growth means I understand what I did to get myself in this situation. I understand how I either didn't protect myself, or I put myself out there too much, or whatever it might be. And so you've got the pattern, you've recognized the pattern, you're valuing growth over fixing the problem, and then you can heal because you see what's going on, and just know that synchronicity will bring another opportunity for you to grow again.
Beautiful.
So the quicker you learn it now, the faster the future will unfold.
Oh, that's beautiful. That was like the beautiful grand finale. I love to end on that. Sky, thank you so much for joining me again on Guided.
My pleasure, Jodi.
I absolutely have loved this hour and a few minutes.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much to all your listeners.
And I'm going to be signing up for this event October 28th, and it's 3 p.m. PST.
Pacific time, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, you too, Jodi. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye, Sky.
Bye.